Thank you, everyone. So excited for our event this month with Laura about how to handle client objections. I feel like this is a hugely important topic, especially if maybe you're a little anxious person or you get kind of stumped easily. So hopefully session will be full with really great advice and really great tips on how to mitigate that nervousness and how to handle all of your clients on future calls so that you can be the best freelancer to mitigate client management issues in the future. Yeah, so excited, Laura. Thank you for coming today.
Yeah, awesome. All right, I will go ahead and share. So client objections, a lot of questions come up for freelancers around that. And so what I've tried to do is I'm going to go through some of the most common client objections and then how I would respond to them. Of course, that means like I cannot cover every possible objection that might happen, but my goal is by talking about some of the general ones, you'll have an idea of the things you should be thinking about when a client raises an objection and the kind of ways that you can pivot that conversation, because you may have an objection that comes up once, or it might be something that like you're too expensive, right? That may be one that you hear multiple times over the course of your freelance career. So hopefully you'll get to see a little bit more about how all of this really connects to client psychology, and dealing with client objections is important not just for you to get the sale, right? Because the way that we as freelancers respond to objections and allow the client to respond to that tells us a lot about whether this is a client we can work with or not, right? So clients that are just cheap, you may have a great response for when they say you're too expensive, and you respond, very clearly about why you charge the rates that you do. That doesn't necessarily mean you'll change their mind, but that information is powerful for you to know either way, because if they're really difficult and not willing to budge at all and all they care about is price, we want to know that so we can say no thanks on working together. I think you learn a lot, and so much of this is really listening. So I'm just going to go right in because I have quite a few things to go through today. So I'm going to cover a couple things. We're going to talk about the basics of like client psychology and how clients think and why that's so important. So much of sales and marketing in the freelance world is all about your client's psychology. It's all about their bad past experiences. It's all about the fears that they have about this project or their business overall. Then we're going to talk about what to expect when pitching and talking to potential clients, and walk through some of those common objections from clients and how to address them. So why does client psychology really matter, right? Because isn't this just a business transaction? They need to order something and we have the services that they want to order, and it's really just haggling about price and deadlines and the cadence of the work and things like that. But it's actually the number one missed thing when a freelancer loses a client, especially as we have more competition for the services that we offer. One of the only ways that we can stand out from other freelancers beyond our experience, or if you have expert credentials or something like that, is by listening to the client, making them feel heard, right? Because clients who are confused or don't see any difference between various freelancers, they don't make a decision, right? So if 10 freelancers all show up with relatively similar experience, relatively similar rates, the client's always going to go with the person who provides them the best experience overall. So sometimes that means they go with the most expensive freelancer, right? I just hired a branding and web design team a couple of months ago, and I vetted a lot of freelancers and agencies in that process. The reason I went with the company that I did was because of how clear they were on the proposal. They had timelines, they had screenshots, they had example wireframes. They'd already done work, and they made me feel like this was already such an organized experience that it was going to be good for me. And so even though they were the second most expensive quote that I received, it felt like the best experience for me as a client. So you want to bring that into your conversations with clients too. We live in a digital world, but my general feeling is that marketing and online business are really craving a human component. People want to work with other humans. Yes, they want a service that is done well, that is turned in on time, but they're far more interested in the human things about you. And so that's why even those small chit chat moments with clients are important. That's where they feel like you get them. So one of my new clients that I've now worked with for about 2 months, it just sort of, he saw on my website that my husband was military and asked what branch and where was my favorite base. It turns out that he had been stationed at that same base during the time my husband and I lived there. And we joked about what it was like because they did grenade training there and it would rattle your house. And it's something very unique that only if you've looked at this base and felt your entire house shaking multiple times a day. That was just a human to human moment where he was like, oh, Laura gets me like this. So anytime you can do things like that to forge that connection or make them feel like you understand who they are, what they want, what's important to them in life, that's really powerful for converting them. When you can learn to read between the lines on your calls and in messages with clients, it's not even about them directly coming out and saying something specific that clues you into their psychology. It's being able to really listen and not just jump into the sale right away, both to make yourself more compelling as the person they should choose, but also to protect yourself, right? Because we are jumping on calls without much context of the client either. We want to make sure we're not working with a jerk. We're not working with people who don't value freelancers, any of those red flag qualities that we've talked about in previous trainings. And so listening is really, really important and not really like projecting what you're trying to get out of the client. So for example, a question I ask all of my clients is, tell me a little bit about your past experience working with freelancers. I'm not coming out and asking the real thing I'm listening for in their answer, which is, how have you treated past freelancers? Do you value independent contractors? That's what I'm getting at with that question, but I'm not telling them. I'm asking an open-ended question and I'm listening in their response to read between the lines, because if I hear things like, I've hired 5 other writers and the relationship imploded every time, the red flag alarm is going off in my mind. But if they say, yeah, I've been burned once or twice, but I think it might be maybe I'm not that good at giving instructions. That sounds like a more reasonable client, right? They're willing to try to figure out, maybe I screwed up in the process and how can I do better? So learn to read between the lines. And then we have to think about what is at stake for the client. A lot of times this is their business. Even if you're working with an employee at a company, this is their reputation, this is their sense of professionalism. So clients always have things at stake, just like we have at stake our reputation, our ability to earn money. And so recognizing what's at stake for the client, maybe they're really worried about being portrayed unprofessionally or not being able to connect with their ideal clients well, or looking sloppy, right? So you got to really think about what is at stake for the client. So I'll give you an example from my position as a client. The wireframes for that web design came in, and overall I loved the wireframes, but I noticed every stock photo they picked was of a woman. And I was like, this is a problem, right? I can't have it seem on my website like I only work with women or I only want to work with women. So that was that agency's opportunity to see that what's at stake for me is I really want to make it clear that any services I provide are meant to be for diverse clients. It's really meant to be for everyone. Like, I didn't want it to come across like, hey, if you're not a woman, don't even contact me, right? So it's important to think about that as you talk to your clients. What is important for them in running their business? And they'll often give you really good clues, either in their job post or on the phone. So for example, anyone who says, I'm overwhelmed, they're not just hiring you to do a service, they're hoping that they're hiring someone that can make sense of chaos. Things might be a mess, so they may be hiring a business manager, an editor, a content manager, a virtual assistant, and they're hoping that not only will you do the services that you've promised to do, but you can help clean up some of this mess along the way, right? And I'm not talking about like providing those services for free, but if you come in and say, hey, I live in spreadsheets and project management tools, this is not a problem, we'll fix it. You have just tapped into the overwhelmed client psychology by making them feel like you have got their back. Likewise, if someone says things like, things are getting lost, the same mistakes are being made over and over again, I can't ever find what I'm looking for, these are little clues about what matters to them. Being disorganized is a problem for that client that says things are getting lost and it's stressing me out. And you can kind of file that away, both in your mind and in your notes that you're taking as you do calls with these clients, to reiterate these same words back to them in proposals and in future conversations. So let's go into some of these actual objections that might come up. So this happens a lot to virtual assistants, but it happens, I've noticed, I was just talking to someone yesterday about how the new thing is to hire a copywriter or content writer, and that's what the client thinks they need, but what they're really asking for is a digital marketing strategist who does more than just the actual writing of a piece where a brief has been handed to them. So sometimes they're looking for that magic unicorn freelancer who can do all of the different things, right? I've had clients say to me, well, but you could charge more if you also did graphic design, or if you also did editing and proofreading. And maybe that's true, but my response to this is to say, hey, I get that. Like, I wish I could hire a virtual assistant who could do everything in my business as well, but that's just not how it works, right? People usually have an area of expertise in maybe 2 or 3 areas, and most freelancers prefer to stay in that lane. I usually even make a joke about it, and I'll say, let me tell you about what I do best, writing. So you don't want me to create anything graphic design wise. It's going to be ugly. The colors are not going to work together, and the fonts are going to be bad because I'm not a graphic designer, and that's not a skill set that I have or one that I cultivate. So you can kind of pull them away from, well, I wrote this job description that says, I want you to do 16 different things. And this is where you can push back a little bit and say, there's 4 things on this list that I'm really good at. Are these the 4 that you're trying to hire for right now? Oops. Okay. So this is, I mean, it's not so much an objection, but it's more like clients often share this to let us know. And it's almost like they're trying to say, hey, you better come in competitively priced because I am talking with other freelancers. I always tell my clients, like, I hope you are talking to other freelancers, right? You wouldn't hire an employee without interviewing several people. You should talk to other freelancers. And I want you to feel confident about who you hire. But then I'm gathering information about their psychology during that call so that when I go back in my follow-ups, I can reiterate what I learned that was important to them. So if they're talking with other freelancers, I will ask things like, tell me about the 2 most important qualities that a freelancer could bring to the table where this would be a perfect fit for you. And usually they'll tell me something like, oh, meeting deadlines, right? Something that's super obvious, or someone who can really think at a high level, but also do the granular work. Okay, I just file that away for myself when I follow up and say, hey, it was so great speaking with you. I know you're talking to other people. Just wanted to recap a couple of things about our conversation and why I think I would be the right fit. And then I'll go back to that of like, I have a history of meeting every deadline that I've been given, or I use advanced scheduling techniques and calendar tricks to make sure I never miss a deadline. That way they feel heard, but and it's not like you're making these things up, right? But you're reiterating to them, hey, I heard you. Deadlines are important. It's important that you have someone who can think strategically with you. And so at the end of the day, they may still choose another freelancer. That's okay, but we're almost putting it out there to say, these are the things that I bring to the table. If this is what you value, I'm just going to kind of leave it right there and see if we're a good fit to work together. And sometimes when you have done this has happened to me a few times. If they end up going with somebody else, they may ultimately come back to you either for this project because they didn't hire the right person, or in the future when there's another project. So it's always good to just keep it like a sense of professionalism, even when a client turns you down or you can't overcome their objection, because you never know when they're going to come back in the future. So sometimes your clients will say, well, I can do some of these things myself. And I often will tell them like, and that's probably what got you here, right? You built your business to this level because you did a lot of things yourself. You were the vice president of 17 departments, essentially, because you were running your business as a solopreneur. However, to get to the next level, something went off in your brain to say, I can't continue to grow. I can't get to the next level I want if I don't outsource some things. And that can usually help them reframe and think about not just, can they do some of these things themselves? Should they be doing some of these things themselves? So I will often push clients to share with me, what are the things you do in your business that are you in your zone of genius? No one else on the team can do it, or no one else on the team can do it at the level that you do. Anything that's not on that list, accounting, invoicing, writing, marketing, editing, picking videos for social media or images, all those other things can be outsourced to freelancers. And so that way you can get them to start thinking about, is it really the best use of their time to be doing some of these things themselves? So get them refocused on where their energy and their time should be going. And then you just need to showcase that you're the right person to handle the rest. I also like to directly ask them, like, what do you charge your clients per hour? Let's say it's a life coach who charges $300 per hour of coaching. I will tell them, like, why are you doing $20 an hour tasks that a virtual assistant can do? Why are you doing $75 an hour tasks that a business manager or a copywriter could handle for you? You are losing money when you spend your limited working hours doing things that are not your zone of genius. If your zone of genius as a life coach is doing the sales calls and doing the paid coaching calls with clients, let's figure out how to make sure that is the majority of the time that you spend. All the other things that need to be done to keep the engine running, that's fine to outsource as much of that as possible. So, but you're too expensive is a common one. I never back down from what my rates are. It's kind of like I'm willing to work with people, say it's a nonprofit or it's a referral that's coming to me from a client I really love. But if someone is outright like, you're too expensive, or you're one of the most expensive freelancers I've talked to, that the tone of that is often so weird that it's like, it's hard to come back from that and really position yourself from value rather than price. So I will, depending on the personality tone of the client, I've been I don't know that it's snarky, but I'll say like, yeah, this is my 10th year in business. I don't, and I can't charge beginner rates. I will just leave that out there. And I'll say, yeah, you can go find somebody who is less expensive. And if that's the right path for you at this point in your business, I totally support that, but I cannot charge those beginner rates with as much experience and, background in this field as I have. So never feel like you have to justify your rates, or that when someone says they think you're too expensive, or, oh, I could go on Fiverr and get someone to do this for $10. You don't want to let that conversation be just about price and go, okay, well, I could do it for 12. And then you're negotiating only on price. You want it to really be about, what do you bring to the table? And it almost feels like it's just meant to rattle your confidence and see if you will hold true to your rates. Now, for the clients who are just like, whoa, that's way too expensive. That's like 10 times as much as what I thought I would pay. If they are pushing you only on your rate alone, it's probably very unlikely that you will sway them to work with you. Or if you do, they will be the worst pain in your neck that you have ever had. So if you get them to commit, they'll probably reduce the scale or the scope of the project so that they can afford it, but they'll also expect the world from that. You probably heard this and experienced this as a freelancer, but it's often our cheapest clients who are the most time consuming, the most frustrating, the most difficult to please. And sometimes it's crazy because it's like your best clients ask for the fewest revisions. They push the scope of work hardly at all, if ever, right? So when you get that objection, this is one where it's really important to listen to their reasoning, right? If their reasoning is, well, I have 3 other freelancers that I pay $5 an hour, very unlikely that you're going to convince them that your rate of 10 times that is something they should pay for you, because they're always just going to be comparing you to those other freelancers. And maybe those other freelancers are comfortable with that rate, and that's fine for them. But there's a difference between that and someone saying, oh, that's a little more than I thought it was going to be. Let me think about whether I can fit this into my budget, because then it's just about showing the client that there's a benefit to paying more for an experienced freelancer. You've got the systems, you've got the knowledge, you're going to make this a good experience for them. You're going to maybe guarantee your work. Like I guarantee that my work is 100% original, not plagiarized. It's like such a silly thing, right? But you have these advanced systems like onboarding and project management and ways that you run calls with the client. Those are value adds as well. So you just want to listen to how they phrase this objection around you being too expensive, because I always lean towards giving clients the benefit of the doubt and not just being cheap. But if I hear comments that make it sound like they are really cheap, I kind of won't push it, right? Like I won't respond to this objection and desperately try to convert them. I got on a sales call once where the person wanted to have a full-length book written for $8,000. And in the first like 6 minutes, I was like, yep, this is not a fit. Like, I totally respect that you're trying to write your memoir, and I just can't work with that budget. So I just want to end the call now and allow you to go back to your research to find somebody else. So it's okay to cut yourself off here and not like you need to overcome the objection if it's clear that they're not going to budge at all. Sometimes clients will say, oh, I'm just shopping around. You know, this is something I'm looking to do in the next couple of months. This isn't a priority. I'm listening here to see why the client is saying it isn't a priority. Is this a cover for them feeling like it's too expensive? Are they thinking maybe it'll be easier if they do it in-house? If the person is overwhelmed, that's a psychological thing, right? That I can include in my proposal some details of how I'll make this a really easy lift for them. I'm going to make this really streamlined so that I'm not contributing to the overwhelm and I'm only taking it away from them. So it's okay to just say, I'll be around. I'll circle back in a couple of weeks to see if things have gotten a little easier. You can also say with this one that I totally understand that. Take some time to think about it. FYI, my calendar book's about 3 weeks out. So just so they kind of have a sense that you are not guaranteeing your availability or this rate forever. And that way they know if there is sort of a period they need to back up. If you're usually booked out a month or something like that, they need to be securing you a month before they want you to start or to turn in the thing. This is a really common one. And the more you can get effective at responding to this one, the more successful you will be overall. Unfortunately, I would honestly say 60 to 70% of the clients I've had, and I've probably worked with around 400 or 450 total in the last 10 years, a good 70% of them have been burned by another freelancer or multiple freelancers before. I joke with some of my other freelance writer friends that half the reason we're in business is just because we're easy to work with and can meet deadlines, and it has nothing to do with any writing ability or anything like that. Because unfortunately, there are people out there that don't run a professional business, or maybe they don't understand what all goes into being a freelance service provider. And so you need to understand that your clients may be coming into this arrangement with that mentality. You shouldn't be punished because they've been burned before, but you also need to be able to listen to some things that may help you navigate this relationship. So in this situation, a great way to handle this is to make them feel more comfortable right away and offer to do a test project. You can do a reduced scope. You can do one piece of the project. If they wanted to order 20 social media posts or 4 blogs a month or something real like simple like that, do one piece of it, do a week's worth, something like that. That way the client knows they're only on the hook financially for one piece. And you can make it clear that this is like meant to be, to make them feel good about it being a good fit. It's not meant to be, yeah, I'm going to invest all this time to do one thing for you or a week's worth of social media. And then I never hear from you again. The real purpose of the test project here is to let them see you're a good communicator, you're good at what you do, you deliver on time. 99% of the time when you do a test project and it's a good experience for you, that should be converting into future business, right? Because if you make the client's life easy and you turn things in on time, there's minimal revisions for them to do, they're very happy to go to the next step. So you just need to get adept at figuring out what would a test project look like. This is also helpful for you so you don't wind up in a massive project or in an ongoing retainer where you find out later that the client is a nightmare. So I've done test projects before. One of them was it was like a 600-word blog. Oh my gosh, the client must have left 37 comments in the Google Doc on the test project. And instantly I was like, nope, there is no reason this should ever happen. I will not do work with this client because it's way too much of a headache. And so it's helpful for you. You're looking for clues too. Do they give you the information you need to get started? Is the revision process seamless? Did they pay you on time for this test project? Another thing you can go to here, if your clients have been burned before, direct them to your Upwork profile, your Fiverr profile, your LinkedIn testimonials, send them to the testimonials page on your website. I have a PDF document that has feedback from some of my favorite clients over the years. Social proof is really powerful here. And knowing that you've almost been vetted by working with other people can really put their mind at ease. So client testimonials can work really, really well here. And also just like hear that, I'm sorry to hear that. It's always disappointing to hear that you weren't able to launch your website because the designer overran the project by 4 weeks and you weren't able to meet your target launch date because of that. Or I've had so many clients that have had plagiarized work put on their website and it hurt their Google rankings. And so just be that human in that moment to hear them psychologically that that's a bad experience, and just say, I'm really sorry to hear that. Unfortunately, I hear that from time to time as a freelancer. It always throws me off because I don't understand why people do that, especially when we have so much control over our business as freelancers. And if they're concerned about specific things, you can talk about how you pivot around that and address it up front. So let's say you're talking to a client that says, I've been burned before. Somebody turned in things 2 weeks late every single time, and it constantly had me in a stress cycle trying to figure out when I would get the work and how I could use it in my marketing plan. You can say, I use a calendar and my project management tool to stay on task. If I do fall behind or life happens or I get COVID or some other crazy thing happens, I'm going to reach out to you right away over email, and I'm going to tell you how long I think I've been delayed, and we can figure out from there together if that's okay, or if there's another approach that you want to take. I think just clients knowing that you'll communicate those things and that you are proactive about it rather than just being like, well, I'll tell you the day that it was due that I'm not going to be able to complete it, gives them some peace of mind. If your client is highly disorganized, and it's like, because I think sometimes our role is half project manager, right? We have to show these clients that whatever system they have going, it may not be a system at all, or it may be kind of a disastrous system. So I'll respond and say things like, hey, let's do a kickoff call. Let's get all the questions answered up front. I'm going to take really good notes. I'm going to map out what this strategy looks like. Then I'm going to share the strategy wrap up bullet points with you after the call. And that way you'll know exactly what's going to happen when. I also like to say things like, yeah, this is my specialty. Don't worry about it. I do this all the time. I love being organized on my end. So that's definitely going to benefit you throughout the life of this project. And as we go, we'll develop better systems for your own company organization. And you can also say, like, you're feeling this way because you don't have a freelancer yet. You're trying to do it all yourself. So of course you feel disorganized because you're trying to run the ads for your company or build a website or launch a blog or do whatever it is. And you're trying to do that all by yourself. And this is, leaning into those past experiences and saying, oh, I've done this lots of times. I have checklists that I follow. This is second nature for me. Like, it's not a big deal to, figure out this process together, can make that client feel at ease because they feel less disorganized just talking to you. Now, this doesn't mean you need to go in and fix all of their mess, but you can tell them, like, maybe they have 50 ideas of what they want to do. You can make simple suggestions as part of the working project. Like, yeah, let's put all these ideas in a Trello card. And then maybe once a month, a task will pop up for you to review the ideas and decide which ones are a priority for the coming month or something like that. Simple suggestion makes them feel a little more organized. Definitely beneficial if it also supports you, right? And so I've done things before, like when I've worked as a consultant and I'm waiting for other freelancers to turn things into me, I will tell them when my review periods are. I will say, I review things Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1:00 Central. If you need to send me something that requires my review before it can be approved, you better have it on this board with this tag by those times. And that can make my client feel more comfortable. It makes the other freelancers feel like, oh yeah, I got to get my stuff to Laura before her review period pops up. So just little things like that make people feel more organized. It can also make your life easier too. I'm afraid you won't get my directions. Okay, how do you communicate best? What is the best way for you to give me directions? Some of my clients have never even heard of Loom, which is crazy to me, but like, I'll send them Looms if I'm stuck. I'll do a screen capture video and say, hey, I'm sending this document into you, but I wanted to make a quick video because I have 3 global questions I'd like you to answer. So get that information from them. What is the best way to communicate with them? And then that way you can adapt or give them feedback on that. I always tell all of my clients, like, please, leave really clear feedback or just make a video because it's easier for me to understand your directions that way. And again, the sample job will help with that. Another thing you can say here is when we do a project, I'll check in with you when I'm 25% complete. That way we can see if I'm on the right path or if I misunderstood your directions. That's a great way of making them feel like, oh, okay, we're not going to find out that this went totally off the rails at the end of the project. I'm going to have a chance to chime in earlier. And then another way to handle this one is to say on projects, I always ask a lot of questions up front to make sure we're on the same page. I put the answers to those questions in the proposal. Sometimes it also goes in the contract just to make sure we are all on the same page. We've all agreed what the finished product is, things the client does and doesn't like, right? Like I'll ask my clients, are there any words you don't ever want me to use? Are there other people's blogs that you hate? You think the style is too casual, too complex? Tell me that at the beginning. And I'm going to put that in my client note file so that when I'm self-checking my work before turning it into you, then I know, oh yeah, this client hates that particular phrase. I have one client who hates adverbs, right? And like, it's just part of my work style. And so I have to have that on my checklist when I'm done to go back and delete every adverb that I have just because it's like a random thing for him. So make them feel like, okay, I'm going to have a system to make sure I hear that from you and that I get the work done properly. I feel totally overwhelmed. That's okay. This is a good thing. Your business is growing. There's pressure on you to serve your own clients, to serve your own business more effectively. It's really smart that you've reached out to a freelancer right now, right? You can make someone feel instantly better in that moment. Most people wait to hire a freelancer. They're like 2 to 3 months behind, right? They really should have started this process a while ago, but it's okay in that moment to just be the human and say, hey, this is a good thing. You've reached out for help, right? Or you can even joke about that. Say like, well, step one is admitting you're overwhelmed and asking for help, right? And we're here. So congratulations on that. Now let's figure out how to move forward together. I don't want to pay you up front. There's 2 routes with this. One is I understand that this is my company policy. Here's how we can adapt that so you feel comfortable if you're willing to do that. But if that is your company policy, just stick with it. If it's a client you really want to work with, maybe you suggest something like, yeah, I understand that. How about we split the invoice? We can do 50% up front and 50% after certain milestones have been completed. Some clients have their own accounting procedures and payment stuff, and you just have to decide, do you want to deal with it or not? I have one client who still pays me by paper check, and he's really easy to work with other than that one thing. So you just have to kind of decide on a case-by-case basis. Do I want to negotiate with this client? Do I want to deal with this one thing that's a little bit difficult or not? But this phrase company policy is important. Freelancers don't often use it because they don't think of themselves as a company, but you are a company. Every company has policies and rules and procedures. It's totally okay to say, my company policy is to get paid up front, or my company policy is a 50% deposit. It kind of removes you from the equation. Even though you may be a solopreneur who made that rule up entirely by yourself, it just kind of, that little word shift is subtle, but it's like, oh, it's company policy. There's less of a chance of it. You don't feel as much like, well, I would like to get paid up front. It's just like, nope, this is how I keep things easy for myself. You really are a CEO, right? So it's okay to have policies like that. No client experience yet. Here's a sample test project I did to showcase what I can do. Here's my portfolio. Here's how I would approach your project. Here are the reasons I still think I'd be awesome at it. And I appreciate you considering me. There's always ways around it. Remember that every freelancer had to get their first client at some point. And so a lot of times people are willing to hire talent over experience too. So just think about how you can, what can you offer that maybe a more experienced freelancer who does have that background, what can't they offer that you can step in and say, okay, I came up with a mini strategy for you, or I'm really passionate about this industry. I've been working in it for 10 years, even if I haven't been doing it as a freelancer. Okay, so that was a lot. I know we ran a little over. So just to recap, client psychology is important because it helps you position yourself as well as protect yourself when you are working with new clients. It does help you figure out when can someone be reasoned with because maybe they think you're expensive, but they really value what you do. We can work with that person. They may still not choose us. They may still think we're too expensive, but that's totally different than the person who is like making, like, you have to convince them to pay your rate, right? It's so subtle, but knowing that can help you really set things off on the right foot. So does anyone have questions on client objections? I know this is like a super hot topic for a lot of freelancers.
Yeah, this was really, really informative. Thank you so much, Laura.
Good.
I had one question for the objection that was about maybe people thinking you're too expensive. And you were like, oh, it's like a signifier, like maybe they don't see your value or things like that. Do you ever, is someone like that even worth getting on a kickoff call, or do you kind of filter out those people by saying upfront, like, well, this company policy is my rates are this, so I don't see the point in even bothering talking to the person if it's going to take up your time, you know?
Yeah, this is such a tricky one because I don't feel like there's any universal answer. Because here's the thing, like, let's say someone contacts me and they're like, what would you charge to make a website or whatever? And I would just be like, $5,000. The whole conversation, without even getting on a call, is about the $5,000. I have not been able to showcase my client experience, my background, my skill set. And so it's very hard to position yourself only from price. That being said, I know a lot of freelancers who do that. They gatekeep and they say, my rates or my monthly packages start at $1,000. And the purpose of that is to tell potential clients, if you don't have $1,000 a month, please don't schedule a discovery call with me. Don't send me an email. So I like to tend to talk to people first if I can, because they may not know what they can afford or are willing to pay. Sometimes people, they really are just like, I know I need to have X strategy or X thing done. I have no idea what it will cost. And so when you get on the phone and you work on hearing their concerns and asking them questions about, well, what would an ideal finished product or project look like for you? Then when you give them a price, that price is in the context of all the things you said along the call. It's not about the $5,000. You said, yeah, I've built over, on the call, you'll be saying things like, I built over 200 websites. I just finished a massive website, just like you're talking about. And so it's less of a blow that it's $5,000. They're like, yeah, it's 5,000, but boy, that freelancer really sounded like they knew what they were talking about. They built a lot of websites like this. It's in that context of value versus price. Now, if someone, posts an Upwork job where they say, my rate is $15 per hour and you need to have 20 years of experience, like, definitely don't get on the call with that person because you're not going to convince them. But if there's, like, the way that I say it too is let's do a call to see if we are a good fit, because I want them to know too, I am checking to make sure you're a good fit for me. It's okay if we're not. I don't view it as a sales call. I really view it as like, let's just connect and see if this is a good possible fit. So it's kind of like that case by case thing. Look for the big red flags, the person who's like, no, this is all I have. This is what I'm paying, or this is the cheap rate I pay other freelancers now. But otherwise, start with value first. And it is much easier for them to be convinced by your price later, because it's in the context of all that awesome value. And they start thinking about, well, maybe I could get a web designer for $2,500, but what if they're not as good? What if they're not as fast? This person said they, involve me throughout the process and get my feedback. I mean, that's all that is worth at least another $2,500. And so people, it's just so much harder to do it when it's from price alone.
Got it. Okay. Do your discovery calls usually take like 30 minutes to provide that context, or like you cap it like 15 or something?
It depends on the potential scope of the project, right? So if it's a small project, I'm going to try to keep them to 20 minutes. You can even use things like Calendly, or you can invite them to the call and literally make it last only 20 minutes, because it gives you a good out if it's not a fit, or if they're talking way too much and it feels like it's going nowhere. You can say, well, I have to jump to another call. If it is a potential huge project or ongoing project, I'm happy to talk to them for 30 minutes. And then I'll always close it by recapping the next step for them, right? Like, even if they say, oh, well, I'm talking to other freelancers, I may have things to say like, let me take a look at your checklist and process and see what I think this would, what this would cost. Or I'm going to recap everything we talked about today. I'm going to put it together in a step-by-step proposal for you. If another call at that point is helpful, you let me know. But that way you're leading with the value. You're like, here's what I'm going to do for you to make this a good experience before you even decide to work with me.
Got it. Okay.
Alyssa says she has a couple questions, but you
Hi.
can't find the hand raise. Yeah.
No, I can't. Yeah, Laura, I just have a couple questions. So the first one, I don't know if it's really to do with client objections, but let's just say you're kind of being, what's the word?
Undervalued.
Like, I guess like undercut or by a bunch of freelancers for a certain project. And, if the client just wants to hire basically the cheapest freelancer for their rates, how do you kind of go about that? Because in some ways you could be losing out on a bunch of clients because of it, but at the same time, you don't want to lower your prices.
So I always seek to learn as much as I can about the client and maybe how I'm potentially being undercut to see if I can position myself around that. So maybe like I'm up against newer freelancers who are charging entry-level rates. I'm not going like, you're not even being shady towards those other freelancers, but you can just say something like, yeah, I've been in business a long time. I've used a lot of tools, worked with a lot of people. And so you're getting the benefit of me being in business for 10 years and I can't charge rates that someone in year 1 or year 2 would. So that's a chance to just position yourself as an expert level. Whether the client respects that or not is really on a case-by-case basis. Some do, and some say, oh, there's going to be a lot of time lost if I hire the cheapest person and they don't do the work or they do it poorly. And then I have to go back and hire this other person anyways and end up paying, and I've lost that time and now I'm frustrated. Some clients, they are just looking for the cheapest possible thing. I like to say like, those aren't my clients. And sometimes you can't always tell that right away, but the right clients are willing to pay for experience. They're willing to pay for quality. They're willing to pay for like a VIP level of treatment. So for example, like if I have a client that needs to have a biweekly or a monthly phone call, I may require that they be on a certain retainer to do that, but that's maybe something that another writer is not willing to offer. And so I'm using that as a way to say, here's how I'm going to keep our project on track or something like that. So it's always like, you don't know, like I've worked with Microsoft as a project manager. They pay medium to low rates for their writers. They have tons of revenue to be able to pay expert tier rates. I've worked with $1 million company that pays $500 a blog post that technically in comparison, you know what I mean? So there's no way to tell for sure. It's really about value. And that's why I like asking that question. Tell me about your experience hiring past freelancers, because I want to hear, do they value what I do? Can I even make an argument? Or are they literally just like, well, we think VAs cost $20 an hour and that's that. Because I can't really position myself around that. But this is like, pull in your past client experience, pull in any extra credentials that you have. If you have like certifications, I will say things like, I've had over 400 clients. You can see all my feedback, blah, blah, blah. Just as kind of a way of being like, I understand I may be up against other people. Here's where I think I may have an edge on those other people. So I think it's probably hardest on places like Upwork, where Upwork forces them to list a budget. And so they'll just choose like the cheapest thing because they're like, oh, maybe I can get, an expert Facebook ad strategist for $20 an hour. And then you have to like re-educate them. But I would say figure out what your unique value proposition is and lean into that. And the right clients will be attracted to that. And the wrong ones will just kind of almost like ultimately self-select out, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that. And I just have one last question.
Yeah.
So let's just say
Yeah.
a client approaches you to do some freelancing work for them, and they approach you with either not stating a price yet or stating a very low price, and then you get back to them with your actual prices that accurately reflects your work, and they say like, oh, sorry, it's out of budget, basically goodbye. How do you go about that? Do you kind of just give in and you say you will accept their low price that they gave you initially? Or if they didn't give you a price, do you go back and say, what are you thinking? Like, I could do it for lower, or do you just kind of not even work with that client in general?
Got it. So pro tip, never commit to price unless you're ready to commit to price. It is
Okay.
100% okay to say, I'm not ready to give you a quote on a phone call. I'm not ready to give you a quote in response to an email. I need to talk to you, because we probably do have questions, right? If they're just like, our budget is X for this project, there's so many different variations that could go, right? Like that could be a 2-page website, that could be an 18-page thing with custom animations. And so you want to talk to them to start with that value and position yourself as a human so they feel a little more connected to you than just somebody they emailed or whatever. But
Yeah.
you also want to get a sense of, are your expectations realistic? Because if their expectations are not realistic, far better to say that over the phone. What I've found is, if you take on a project where you know from the jump you have been undervalued and you are being paid a low rate,
Yeah.
that client will only ask more. They're not just going to stop there. They're going to have really high expectations.
Okay.
And so I mean, and just keep it general. Like, you don't have to commit to anything. I'll always say, hey, this sounds like an interesting project. I have a couple of questions. Can we hop on a 15-minute call so I can ask them? And that's when you create that custom proposal. Now, if it's a client where you really want to work with it, let's say maybe they gave you this wish list on the call of all the things they want. And then they say, well, our budget is, $5,000 to $6,000. And you're like, that's totally unrealistic for what they're asking for. That's when you send them a proposal with some options. The most expensive option is, hey, here's all the things you said you wanted. FYI, that's going to take this long and cost this much. Now, budget is a key driver in this project. Here's some scaled down versions I'm willing to do, and only send them packages you are comfortable selling. So if one is like $500 and you're like, this isn't even worth my time, don't even put it on there. Just say, these are the 3 options I can provide to you, and tell them the pros and cons of each. Tell them in package 2, like, here's why this costs less, but maybe it doesn't include an important element of the project that they need to know that, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I would handle it. Always try to talk to them, but never feel like you have to commit to a price. And if they're firm on the call of like, yeah, this is all that we have the money for, that's when you can say, 1, do I even want to deal with this client?
Mhm.
And 2, is there a scaled down version I can offer them to meet their budget that still makes sense for me as a business owner? But I think it's important too to have that conversation to see if their expectations are realistic, because sometimes they really just don't know. They read from Tim Ferriss that it's totally possible to get a virtual assistant for $4 an hour, or they heard about so-and-so whose cousin built their website for $500. That's not necessarily their fault, but that's their worldview of what it costs to pay an expert freelancer. But I would just give them the chance. I always give clients the benefit of the doubt until they give me a red flag to feel otherwise.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. No, that definitely helps a lot. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I had one last question, but it's like a side question.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned earlier that when you work with a new client, you create like a file, like a client note file. Can you go into more detail about that? Like, is that like a sticky note that is just all the little details you need to remember, or is it like incorporated into a calendar system or something you have?
I just keep it simple. I use Google Suite. So within my Google Drive, I have a folder called Client Instructions. Each client has their own subfolder. And within it, I keep notes from my initial call. If they have special invoicing instructions, I'll save that in there. If there's special like links that I want to bookmark, that I want to make sure I always have. I have some clients where we do running meetings, so I will just keep a running doc of all of my notes from every meeting so I can always reference it. But you can just keep it really simple like that. And that's such an easy thing. It really helps you as the freelancer, right? But clients love to hear that. Whenever a client, like my client with the adverbs, he's like, I just don't like adverbs. I'm like, all right, I'm going to note that in your client file. And it's like, client file. I was like, yeah, I keep like general feedback from you, questions you have, things I learn as we work together about what you do and don't like. I keep track of that. And so that's another one of those things that just makes clients feel like you're about more than just the service. If they tell you something once, they're not going to have to say it 9 more times because you heard it the first time that they need things turned in on Tuesday and you've recorded that in your client file. So build a system that works for you. But I find it super helpful also because clients come out of the woodwork like, I won't hear from somebody for 2 years, and then all of a sudden they'll be back and I'll be like, I don't know. Like they'll act like no time has gone by, and they're like, can you do more work for me? And I'm like, what was I even charging this client back then? I need to raise my rate, but I can't remember. So all my client note files really help with that, so that I can quickly get up to speed on that sort of thing. And then I just have one that's called like old clients. And if I'm not working with someone anymore, I'll just drop all those folders in there so it's clean.
Okay, super helpful tip. I need to create that. Oh my.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much. Is there any other questions before we wrap up? I know we took a lot of your time, Laura. Any other questions?
Oh no, I'm happy to do it.
No questions? No? Okay. I think if that's it, we could wrap up. But thank you so much, Laura. This was super informative. And I really love and appreciate your dedication to like your abundance mindset, because I feel like a lot of new freelancers might be scared to like object to these client statements because they're new and then they're inexperienced. So you think like, oh, I'll never get another client again if I stick to these principles. But I really admire that your dedication of reinforcing that your value is worth what you're charging and all those things. So amazing advice. I'll be posting this recording in the Numina app. But yeah, thank you again so much, Laura. Have an amazing day. Thank you everyone for coming.
Laura.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.